Hey everybody, welcome back to Unafraid. And surprise, we're on video as well if you're on YouTube watching this. So that's a fun thing this week. I'm Jay, of course, your host. You know me quite well by now from the last year and a half or so. And I am braving another recording. I am still quite ill. I have not recovered from the COVID lung just yet. So if you notice, I've got a little bit of vocal fry going on, and I still get pretty short of breath. But we're gonna try to make it happen because I've really missed doing these, and I got a couple good episodes in, and then all of a sudden it flared up. So I was like, oh man, I've got to scale back for a few weeks and do some reading and kind of let myself recover. So I think I'm up to it today. Here, we'll see. Before we get going too much, I do want to thank the show's sponsor, Rebecca Jonesy, who is a friend and ally to the queer community and a personal friend of mine. And she is the author of the Mabs Doll series, where the Fae know that everyone is unique and all love is valid. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for making it possible for me to keep this show going, especially during such a difficult year. Gosh, and there's tons more people I could thank. Everybody who's ever come on this show, I love all of you. You're all amazing. I have learned so much from all of you, and truly, you're the reason I'm still here and not, locked up somewhere trying to figure out what's going on with my head. So thank you, everyone who's ever been on. All right, well, enough me just random rambling here. A new guest for you today, June Joplin. How are you today, June?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me on. It's good to be here, and I'm glad you're feeling well enough to record.
Yeah, well, thank you. And June, you're an American living in Canada. I think you just told me that.
That's right. Yeah, I'm originally from North Carolina. Grew up down in kind of the mountain region of that state, and I live in the Toronto suburbs now.
Oh, okay. Oh, so I didn't have to worry about the time zones so much after all because
No, yeah, I'm in the Eastern time zone.
I was telling her that I'm absolutely terrible with setting people up on time zones because I'll get, Pacific time and Mountain time, and then I'm Eastern time, and then there'll be Eastern Daylight time, and I really don't know how it all works. So it's all a big guessing game here. But
All made up. It's just all made up.
yeah, everything is made up. It really
Yeah.
is. So, an American living in Canada is sounds like my dream, because I would really, I mean, actually, in the last week or so, I'm feeling better about being in America. But for the last few years, I'm like, boy, Canada seems like it would be an amazing place to be. How was the environment over there? Was it a pretty good place for an American?
Well, yeah, the interesting thing about the Toronto area is that I think native Torontonians are in the minority. Most people in the Toronto area are from someplace else. And I think that it means like not just people from elsewhere in Canada, but like immigrants to Canada make up a substantial proportion of the Toronto community. And, like immigrating from the States to Toronto is like being an immigrant on easy mode. So, in some ways, I've been to programming like at the LGBTQ Center in Toronto for newcomers to Canada, and realized really quickly that there's a huge difference between, say, a white trans woman coming from America to Canada than, say, like a queer person from Nigeria immigrating to Canada, and in terms of like the experience and stuff like that. And so, yeah, I mean, it's good. It's like 90% the same as the United States, I think. But in that 10%, there's a lot of things that will sort of sneak up on you. And I've been here 7 years now, so it's all kind of like second nature to me. But I think politically speaking, I came here during the Obama presidency and when Stephen Harper was prime minister. So I was leaving like a progressive political scene for a more conservative political scene. So that didn't really factor into it. It was just I came for my job. But it's certainly, I can remember the first time we drove down to the States after the 2016 or the 2017 inauguration, really, and just kind of having this I don't know, the sense of like ominous dread as we approach the border, just kind of wondering, oh, like, I mean, and maybe that was um, maybe that was more paranoid than anything, but it certainly felt like there was a cloud over the country, and I think a lot of folks that live down there would say the same thing, and hopefully some of it is lifting. Um,
It is for sure. Well, and I yeah, and some a lot of it, most of it was being paranoid, but even my own kids, because we're we're kind of a we're kind of a big gay family over here. There's a lot of queerness going on in my family, which I think is a beautiful thing. And my youngest, after after he who shall not be named was inaugurated, said, he's going to come for us all now, isn't he? And it was the most heartbreaking thing. It was horrible. And so I'm very thankful that that's over and we can hopefully move on to some
yeah,
better things now.
me too. And I I think we will be, I guess, examining the consequences of the damages for years. I think there are a lot of us that um, like to use the language of like, well, we survived the Trump presidency, and for a lot of people that didn't, and some of us that still carry a lot of privilege, whether it's because of where we live or like our race or education or whatever. Like we came out of it pretty unscathed, but there are a lot of folks that weren't, and
Well, yeah, and that's the thing right there, isn't it? Too, is it's the privilege. Not everybody is fortunate enough to look a certain way or sound a certain way or be in a certain income bracket, and that makes all the difference. So yeah, we definitely didn't come out unscathed. Um, Boy, but you know what? Let's not talk about the evil one anymore,
right,
because there's been so much of that. We don't need any more. But
yeah,
I did feel like we needed to address it. I'm looking here at my desk. My wife makes me these amazing little crocheted animals. So this is a little it's a
oh,
it's kind of like a voodoo doll bunny. It's got pins in it, and so then I'm looking over here, and I'm looking at my baby Yoda, and now I'm seeing that there are pins in baby Yoda.
oh
Somebody's
no,
been coming down and sticking pins in him.
well, he
That's
would be
not
such.
cool, Grogu. Come on, man. My youngest is just amazing. They are kind of my biggest cheerleader, and I'm their biggest cheerleader. It's so crazy because they're 12, but it's like we're almost the same person going through all sorts of crazy stuff. But anyhow, they're dating someone online who is um, in some whatever part of Canada is right past Detroit. I think that's Windsor.
Windsor, yeah.
Windsor, Canada. So they have just been begging about making a trip to Canada. I was like, we're gonna do it someday. I don't think we could even go now, but
I have a couple of friends, trans women or non-binary femmes that one lives here in Toronto and one lives in Buffalo, and they started like an online relationship, and the sweetest thing I've ever heard. Before, when the border was closed and there was absolutely no way for them to visit, um, they actually like looked at GPS and figured out a way that they could hike through, I think, places there aren't really even trails to come to what they figured was the narrowest point they could get to in the Niagara River, so that one of them was sitting and waving from the Canadian side of the Niagara River, and the other was on the American side. And it was the most beautiful moment that I think I've ever heard described. And it's interesting. I have a friend that's visiting friends in the States right now, and their whole thing is they have to get in an airplane, and there's not really a flight from Toronto to Detroit because it's like a 4-hour drive. So often what you got to do is like catch a flight to, I think I had a friend that like flew to Chicago and had like an 8-hour layover in Chicago and then flew to Detroit from there. And so you're traveling all day to get to a place that's like, a good day trip, but people are making it happen. um, I haven't been, it's been over a year since I've been in the States, but I'm looking forward to getting back at some point. Oh no, it's not been over a year. I was there in March, just before COVID shut everything down. I was in Detroit.
okay. Okay. Well, that Niagara River story is incredible.
It's extraordinary. And one of the most moving expressions of love I've ever heard. Um,
That's a story that should be on NPR or
yeah,
something.
everyone should.
It's
I think they
amazing.
tweeted about it and I think they posted on Instagram too. But gosh, what a yeah! I'm astounded and touched and even a little envious that there are people in the world that have such passion for one another.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's that oh God, that's just I mean, it makes me a little teary just to think about it. I'm like, oh, that's just such a cool story.
Yeah,
Um, well, that's really good. Now you moved to Canada for work, you said, and
I did.
you're a pastor, right?
That's right. Yeah. I like I said, grew up in North Carolina. Went to seminary and served my first pastorate position in Richmond, Virginia. So I lived in Richmond from like 2003 to 2013, 14, thereabouts. And I I was so repressed and like not self-accepting, and so like there weren't um, um, conscious longings to get out of the South so I could like transition or focus on transition. But I did have this sort of, I felt this draw like out of the South. And the best way I could describe it is, my background is Baptist, and there are more, Baptists are more numerous than just about any other variety of Christian in the United States. The Southern Baptist Convention is still as far as I know, the largest Protestant denomination in North America. So they're kind of everywhere, and there are parts of the United States that are some of the most Baptist on earth. I think I saw census data or polling data from um, South Carolina that said something like 30 or 40% of South Carolinians are Baptist, and that's not
Oh,
Christians. It's like Baptist, and so whenever yeah, I'm pretty passionate about church history. That was my favorite subject in seminary. And the story of the church is again and again that when the church becomes really numerous and really powerful, they often misuse that cultural influence. And so Baptist became like the dominant religious expression in the southern United States. And in some ways we used it well. A lot of ways we used it poorly. And I was getting up and leaving for work in the mornings. I was driving like 10 blocks and passing 4 or 5 little Baptist churches on the way. And at some point I said to myself, it would be really interesting to serve someplace where there's not a million Baptist churches. And so I actually started looking at places like the upper Midwest and New England, looking for a placement there. And somehow, like through it's kind of providential, I guess, that I ended up in Mississauga, which is suburban Toronto. Like the Toronto airport is in Mississauga. So that's where I came. And there's only, we're 700,000 or 800,000 people in Mississauga, and there are not that many Baptist congregations. There are a few.
well, I like that you were actively seeking out somewhere a little different, that didn't
Yeah.
have as much of a Baptist influence, and I think that's really neat. Um, um, it's it's tough for me sometimes talking about the church because I was raised Catholic, and it wasn't the best experience for me. Which being raised religious isn't the best experience for everyone. Excuse me, but it's one of those where I love the passion and the faith that I can see in other people who are really wanting to do good, and wanting to share that with more of the world. And I wish there was more of that, but it's still clouded by it's clouded by the negative things that I hear, and so it's tough for me to separate that, the faith from the negative.
Yeah. And as somebody who's kind of a progressive faith leader, I always try to be sensitive to just to folks who have either no relationship with religion or like a negative association with religion, it's pretty easy for me to say, oh well, like there's a bunch of alternatives, and there are, like um, if you look at like queer history in the United States, I am fascinated by the Compton's cafeteria riot, which happened in San Francisco a couple of years before Stonewall, and it's this trans women fighting with police because they were tired of being the victims of brutality and injustice. And that entire scene there in San Francisco, one of the organizations that was very involved in like the early LGBTQ plus liberation movement was Glide Memorial Methodist Church in San Francisco. They were making really meaningful connections to the transgender community in the 1960s. Here in Canada, in Toronto, the church that I mostly attend when I'm not speaking someplace else, the Metropolitan Community Church of Toronto, like performed what ended up becoming like the first legal same-sex marriage on earth, and so
Wow.
they helped establish PFLAG in Canada. Like it's it's sad that so many people misuse religion to spread bigotry and bigoted ideas. And I never want to discount people's negative experiences with religion. Oh my goodness, there's your cat's bottom.
Yeah.
Hi, Kitty. I guess if you're just listening and not watching, that's going to feel really weird. But um, there are a lot of wonderful places that faith and queerness intersect, and that's been that way for a long time. So yeah, I try to I try to be one of those places that queerness and faith intersect. I do these days, since I got fired from my old job, I'm guest preaching at a rate of like more than one church per weekend because I can do that through pre-recording and time zones and stuff like that. And so there are all these congregations that are opening their communities to me virtually, and in most cases, I'm the first transgender woman to fill the pulpit and preach at those churches, and so like yeah, there's stories out there, but then there are horror stories too, and those are real and valid and deserve empathy and attention and compassion. God is very difficult to define, and I wouldn't attempt to, but in the sense that we believe that God is creator and source of being and always inviting us to become like the best and highest version of ourselves. Like that's something I think a lot of folks can get on board. I mean, I don't know. There are folks who have a pretty maybe rightly so sometimes a really negative view of God. And I know like when my stories started coming out, there were like the Friendly Atheist did a couple stories on me after I came out and after I got fired. They were really lovely stories, but inevitably the comments, I sometimes I try not to read the comments very often because that's kind of rule number one. But the negative comments that some of my stories would get were of two kinds, and there were the ones who just said horrible transphobic things that you can imagine, and then there were the ones that said like horrible anti-religion things. Like they could accept my identity, they could accept my transition, but they would say, why does she need like an invisible sky friend or stuff like that. And so they were just as I got into a bit of an argument in my YouTube comments once with another trans woman who was saying some pretty hateful things about religion. And I said, you sound just like a transphobe, except you're a religion phobe. And I would think of all people, you would know not to prejudge an entire group of people. And she didn't take too kindly to that, but it's kind of weird where that stuff and like again, I think that a lot of folks have rightly tense or troubled or conflicted relationships with religion. If you've grown up in a very conservative religious environment, especially if it stifled your ability to accept yourself or to come out to yourself or to be yourself, then maybe the best thing you can do is walk away from it. But that's not what we all do.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, and honestly, truthfully, I wish that I had faith in God. I mean, I really do. Because the true believers that I've met or heard speak, it just seems like they have a peace in their life that I'll never have,
Mm,
because I don't believe that there's somebody else watching over me kind of thing, and that makes me sad. It makes me sad for myself, which is horribly serving. But so I wish that I had that faith, and I think that if I had grown up in a little bit different environment, it would be easier for me to make that journey. But I mean, I'm 40 years old, and in some ways that's old, but in other ways it's kind of like, well, you know what? I've still got time to find any path that I want to find.
yeah,
I
oh, for sure.
I mean, I could who knows what the future may bring, and I'm very confident that a year from now, this won't look anything like it looks right now. I mean, it will look like a completely different person.
Mhm.
Um, but, so it's never too late to change. Not that you have to, but, sorry, I kinda went off a little bit there on that, but it's like, a lot of old bad memories. I remember we had a priest that just said some really nasty things, and it's hard to get it out of your head, so it kinda best
Yeah,
to I guess best to forget it if you can, right?
yeah. I think that can be the best way to do it
Yeah.
in some cases. I've occasionally kind of come at it from. I'm almost your opposite in that, like, I have occasionally thought to myself, man, if I could just be an atheist, I wish I could just be an atheist. Because um, yeah, there's just something. I don't know. I can't explain it. I mean, what point would it be to explain it? But there's just a yeah. Faith is weird. I don't know.
It is. Well, so I read your sermon
Oh
when you
yeah.
came out to your church. Of course, and I'm sure millions of people have read it, uh, and it was beautiful. And uh, and I know the position didn't work out there, but so I wanted to talk to you about something that's personal to me, as if I haven't already been doing that. Um, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about self doubt. Uh,
Okay.
so so you see me. Anyone who's watching this can see me. Those who are just listening to it, you can probably infer what I look like by my voice. That's kind of what we do in our brains. So I look like a 40-year-old white dude, and I am very, very early on in my transition process, where it's just in the last couple of weeks that I've began with feminizing hormone therapy. Um, and seeing a wonderful gender therapist. I'm very, very happy about all that. Um, but I'm also at the stage where I look at myself every day, and I'm like, what are you doing? Look at yourself, listen to yourself, and how could you ever think that you could be somebody other than this? And it's it's really um it's really disheartening. It's tough to hear those thoughts inside my own head. Um, and I understand it's because I'm so early on and because I look like such a dude, I get it. I get it. I'm pushing through that, but I'm wondering, do you ever experience anything like that in your life?
Yeah, for sure. I still feel it every day. And I think part of that, and I'm constantly asking myself, why is it that I still feel this way when people in my life, they see me as the woman I am. They accept that I'm the person that I am. I was talking to had this wonderful friend. He used to be in my youth group when I was a youth minister. So we've known each other since I was 19 and he was 11. And he is now he's a professor of Old Testament studies in Nebraska, and he's on the like the Trans Action Committee at his university, and like really really involved in. He's a cishet white guy, but he's really involved in like LGBTQ plus stuff at his university, and but he's amazing. And I was talking to him yesterday. We were messaging one another, and he was just talking about how from the moment that I came out to him, he was like, "Oh yeah, that makes perfect sense." And we were, and we, not that this is a, not that this is a make or break thing, but we were sort of talking about how that just that idea of your identity making sense, and how like he was up in Toronto a year or two ago for a conference, and we went out. And the first night that we went out, I was pretty early on too, and I went out with him presenting mail, and I came out to him there, and we were sitting on a patio at a pub in Toronto, and it was just like a switch flipped in his head, and for the rest of the night, it was all she and her. And I mean, like I was a little weird about folks using she and her when I was like presenting mail, and I didn't want the attention necessarily, but like he just immediately saw me for who I was.
God, that's amazing.
And
That's
he's been incredible. Yeah, yeah, his name's Jonathan. So hey Jonathan, if you're tuning in, like I love you, man. And um so there are people in my life like that. And whenever I have conversations with folks like that, I'm like, God, I wish I could see myself the way that they do. Um I'm getting there. It's taking a while. I I think if you spend a lot of time in social media spaces that are populated by trans folks, trans women, non-binary folks, and even trans men, like you see, like we post a lot of selfies. Like my selfie um, my selfie stats have gone like through the roof since I became self-accepting, which is crazy because like there's so many folks that'll post like timeline photos like before and after, and I'm like, I didn't take selfies before. Like there are almost no photos of me. Um, and I think sometimes folks get I don't know, indignant about selfies, but a lot of times that's our way of just getting a little reminder that, oh yeah, this is who I am. Like this person that I see when I look in the mirror is who I am. And to the extent that like your physical appearance matters, and I think it does matter, it's good to get those reminders. Um, so I look forward to getting to the place where I am not, I don't get a little shock or a surprise every time I look in the mirror, or when I can close my eyes and see the person that everybody else sees. Like I have a friend that uses the terminology of like your internal avatar, and
yes.
how,
Yeah.
how it takes a while for your internal avatar to update. And so,
Okay.
I mean, I don't know. What I would say is be kind to yourself, be gracious to yourself, and yeah, it takes a while to get there. Um, part of what I said in that coming out sermon is that I believe that God sees us as we are, that God knows us as we are, even if we don't know ourselves yet. And in as much as that kind of language communicates with people, I think that can be helpful. Um, but yeah, it's just I'm constantly growing. Um, I can't wait. I can't wait till COVID's over and there are more social interactions, because like I am still at that point in transition where it's still kind of blows my mind when somebody calls me miss or ma'am or she or her, because it kind of feels new, but on the other hand, like when you transition in your late 30s, early 40s, you've got an awful lot of memories that are incongruent, and a lot of internal data you use to kind of process being in the world, and all that data is skewed, um, and you can't just override it.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
and it's interesting, and you had an amazing experience with Jonathan, but for everybody else in your life too, it's like, okay, well, they've known me as Jason the man for my whole life. Okay, so this is a big this is a lot of big changes to ask people to go through. So, and
yeah,
that's why I'm doing the they them thing right now. And while I'm kind of in flux and in seeing what the path looks like in front of me, just to try to take it easy on people and take a little bit easier on myself. So you're planning on staying with the church. You're gonna keep pastoring, right?
Well, that's been an interesting question. I've had a lot of thoughts about that. It's certainly, I think my experience with the church, with responses to my coming out, some of the scrutiny that I faced between coming out and getting fired, and then just getting fired itself, um, and the kind of radical self honesty that comes with transition. All of that has sort of awakened me to the fact that the church has been a pretty big source of trauma in my life, you know? Um, and I often ask myself, well, should you stay in church work? Should you keep doing that? Or should you look for something else? And, so there are those, I guess, like personal, theological, spiritual, whatever dimensions to that. But then there's just a very practical dimension to it. And it's like, I've been working as a pastor in one way, shape, or form for 20 something years, and I have a master's of divinity degree and a pretty good resume, and it's probably my best shot of earning a living moving forward. And like I think I'm pretty good at it. So there's all that to take into consideration. I am hopeful that I will end up someplace that is really wonderful and really inclusive, and that is a place where I can experience some healing and do like and serve in a way that is better and fuller than I ever have. But it's been hard. There've been times I've thought, God, why am I doing this to myself? Why don't I just go find a job doing something else? And I don't know. It's not been the easiest thing to decide. In terms of like guest preaching, I've just people have been asking me. I haven't really promoted myself. I'm a horrible self promoter. Like I would never. Like I'm a terrible public figure in as much as I am a very very low level public figure. Like I'll preach a sermon or I'll do a guest pulpit supply thing, and I'll think, well, I could tweet about this, but like who cares? Nobody cares. Or it doesn't matter if I don't post this on YouTube because nobody's watching anyway, or who wants to hear me say anything else? So I mean there's this kind of self-doubt, but in spite of the fact that I don't like promote myself at all, like the requests keep coming in. They've started to dry up a little, but they're between like July and next month. It's been at least one pulpit every Sunday, and I don't want to say no, even though sometimes I'd like to take a break. I don't want to say no simply because these are these churches where, like I said, no trans woman has ever been the guest preacher before, and I think that visibility, and maybe a little bit of courage just to step into these spaces that are traditionally not super affirming or positive for trans people is what motivates me. Because if I can connect with people who can change their way of thinking, or if I can connect with people who maybe are questioning themselves and wondering about their own identities, then I feel like I've made a difference. And I'm trying to share messages that are uplifting and inspiring, and just good theologically sound sermons, regardless of if you take my identity out of the equation and everything, it's still it's my craft, it's my job, it's something I'm kind of passionate about.
Yeah. Well, and during your sermons, like when you're a guest speaker, do you bring up your identity, or is that not even brought up during the sermon?
It depends. I did a kind of like an interfaith round table kind of thing with a rabbi friend of mine, and she said, I didn't invite you because you're trans or anything to do with that. I just think you're a really wonderful female pastor, and I thought it would be neat to be on the program together. So we talked for about an hour in that kind of roundtable format, and my gender identity didn't even come up, not once. And so like, and that was actually kind of lovely. I like that. But then, often it's the case that um, it does come in, but not always. I I believe that. Well, I've spent a lot of time this last year trying to make sense of my own experiences from the lens of a pastor and someone who studies the scriptures and is always trying to make connections between these really old stories that they're often kind of strange and today, and that's what all preachers do ideally. And how do we make that connection? So I don't know, like yesterday I preached a sermon about a healing in the Gospels where after the person is healed, and really it's an exorcism, like the person is said to have an unclean spirit. And, I don't try to explain that away, just kind of let it be what it is and focus on the fact that at the end of the story, when this person has been transformed and this person is someone totally different than he was before because of his encounter with Jesus, everybody gets terrified of Jesus and they ask him to leave their town. The healed person wants to go with Jesus because he wants to get out of there. He doesn't want to, but Jesus says, no, you need to stay here and be visible so that people will know what's happened to you. And so like that story, that's a powerful story, regardless of who you are,
Yeah.
And so it's very difficult for me as a trans woman not to see a little bit of myself in that story. But I don't think it's a story that's solely applicable to queer people. I think it has a special application for queer people of faith, but and not every sermon comes in. It doesn't come into every sermon. But
do you get a good response from people after your sermon, or don't you interact with them afterward?
Yeah, it's hard on Zoom. Preaching is not preaching.
Oh, that's right. I'm picturing you in a church, of course.
No, it's all. I have to give a lot of credit to my seminary preaching professor who had just published a book called Preaching and Intimacy when I was taking his class. And it was all about how preaching is not just getting in front of a crowd of people and delivering this message that's entirely one way. It's not you imparting wisdom in this, one-way transaction. It is all predicated on your connection, your intimate connection with your congregation. That's a hard thing to approximate in Zoom or whatever streaming service you happen to be using. But it is true that most of the churches that I connect with, or faith communities I connect with, do something like a coffee hour after virtually, and you can talk with people and get some feedback and answer questions, and I like that. I enjoy that. It's not quite the same as meeting folks in person, but it does give me a chance to just make that connection in a fuller way.
That's awesome.
And the feedback's usually pretty good. I preached a sermon right after the insurrection. I preached in 3 different churches that Sunday, and it was the Sunday in the church year when we retell the story of Jesus being baptized and kind of what that means. And that's actually I didn't really say anything about my gender identity. That was one of those sermons where I just talked about belovedness and about God seeing us for who we are, and about grace being pervasive. And in one of the coffee hours, I got some pretty constructive but kind of critical feedback. And even that, I thought, thank you for sharing that with me. Like I wouldn't have, because it just happened to be from somebody that was quite unlike me in terms of like gender and race and level of privilege and stuff like that. And I can only preach from my point of view, and I really value that feedback when somebody says, well, within my context, based on like my community and my experience, I don't know if what you said there is quite the right thing to say. And I just had to say, well, thank you. Like I can't presume to have an answer for that, but I'll sit with it, and I appreciate you bringing it up.
Oh, and that's really all we can do is when we're
Yeah.
presented with new information to try to learn from it. Um, and I've said it on this show many times. Everything you hear on Unafraid is going through the lens of me or my guest, and we don't represent everybody. So our opinions might not be the same. Um, so I have a question for you that's going to pull you away. Now, what are you doing down here? The other cat's looking like
Oh,
wants to jump up here now. Um, and this is this is so far off topic from what this show usually does, but um, one of my favorite hymns um, is "Amazing Grace," and
yeah.
I thought of it because you just mentioned grace, and I think that for a lot of people who may not be very religious or just may not understand, don't know what grace is. What exactly is grace? I mean, how can that apply in our lives?
Um, yeah, that's a good question. And you know, I think a lot of folks have some connection to that hymn, regardless of religion or experience with Christianity in particular. Grace is a gift, just a really lovely gift. And if you've ever had somebody give you something that you didn't expect, and I'm not talking about like I asked for a PS5 for Christmas and I got a PS5 for Christmas. Like that's not grace. That's neat, but like that's not the same thing. It's just when you get something, when something is given to you that is just amazing and unexpected, and it really is all around us. We get it. Like when when I first started coming out to friends, like my friend Jonathan, when I came out to him presenting mail on a patio, and he made the switch immediately. I mean, that was a really decent thing to do, and you could argue, yeah, that's just common decency, but like it's grace. He's looking at me and saying, we've got 20 years of history, but like you're a woman, like it's so clear to me. And grace is when you you allow yourself to imagine like something better down the road, and you're just not too hard on yourself because you realize that you're making progress. Grace is um, breath and life, and finding little gifts wherever. And
It sounds like it may be a little bit of lifting of a burden of some kind.
yeah, for sure. And the frustrating thing for me, and I think a lot of folks, is religion has kind of co-opted a lot of this stuff. When we talk about grace, we're not talking about something theological, or we're not talking about something Christian. We're not talking about something that the church owns, has a patent on. You know, um, there's a lot of concepts or ideas or virtues that are really central to what we would call religion, but that are not religious. Like um, and grace is a wonderful example. Um, I think, and in fact, as you get to know the queer community in little bits and pieces, I think you'll see examples that are more meaningful and sincere than a lot of what you'll see in religious spaces. And so, yeah, I think grace is just kind of everywhere. Um, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So sorry to throw one at you
Oh,
without any warning there. It's one of those, just one of those kind of rando thoughts. I love I love the idea of that. I know it's not exactly the same thing, but I love the idea that there may be some kind of energy throughout
Yeah.
life that, you
You
know.
know, I like to describe the day that I became self-accepting. You know, I tell the story. It was Friday the 13th, Friday, April the 13th, 2018, and it was a kind of gloomy, rainy day here in Toronto, and I was in my office in Mississauga, like just in a fog, you know, because I'm dealing with these huge questions about who I am, you know, and I had been Googling, you know, who can I talk to? Where can I go? And I found that in Toronto is like the oldest queer bookstore in North America. And I'm going to go there. So I got in my car and I drove into the village, right near Church and Wellesley, right in the center of like the historically queer neighborhood in Toronto. And there's the Glad Day bookstore, which has been, like I said, selling books for and by the queer community for probably 40 years or more. And I went in and, you know, I was just, I looked, first off, I looked entirely different than I do now. And I just sort of browsed a little bit and I found somebody that worked there. And I said, I have questions about my gender identity. What should I be reading? And it was the first time I'd ever said that out loud to anybody.
Oh,
And I was in tears. And they said, they gave me some suggestions, but then they said, you know, the community center is just up the block, the 519. And you could talk to somebody about getting into therapy. And I did. I walked up there and I got a pamphlet and I made the call. And a couple of weeks later, I had an intake appointment. And I sat down in this little room with like a 22-year-old MSW student, I think, you know, very young. And um, at some point, they said to me, because I was talking about my job and my gender identity and how I had felt like being a minister and being transgender were entirely at odds with one another, and there's no way they could ever reconcile. And at some point, the person said to me, "It sounds to me like you need to show yourself the same kind of grace that you show other people." And I'll never forget that. That just sort of, you know, took my breath away and swept me off my feet because it never occurs to you like you know, as a minister, your job is to like demonstrate grace with people, to say it's okay. Look, you know, you're enough. You're good. You're beloved the way that you are. And um, I'm not here to judge you or try to make you feel bad or hurt you. You are enough. And then to turn that around and say it to yourself, it's so hard.
you're
Um,
gonna make me cry, June. Oh. Yeah.
I'm still learning. I still, you know, it's been almost 3 years now, and I'm still not great at showing myself the same grace that I would show other people.
Yeah. That's the hardest thing, isn't it?
It is. It is. I think you know, surrounding yourself with other really amazing trans folks has helped me. You know, because I had coffee with a trans guy a couple of months ago, and he was talking about himself in high school. And in my mind, I'm not picturing somebody presenting female as he would have been in high school. I'm just picturing him like he's always been him. This you know, really lovely man sitting across from me at this coffee shop. Like he's always been who he is. And I came away from that, you know, that meeting saying, what if I saw myself that way? It's so easy for me to see my trans friends that way. Oh, you've just always been that person. Whether you transitioned at 18 or 68, you know, that's just obviously you are who you are. Like, and there can't possibly have ever been this other person. I've seen like photos or video of trans friends pre-transition, and it's just it just kills me because it's like that can't possibly. It's so it's hard to um it's hard to take in the fact that like they ever had to live that way. And so I can see other people like that. Then how come
Yeah.
I haven't got to the point where I can see myself that way yet?
If you figure out how to flip that switch within yourself, please call me immediately
Yeah,
and tell me how to do it.
I think a lot of us could benefit from that. Yeah, it's so hard. I know, but I believe we keep putting one foot in front of the other, and we get better and better at it. And
Yeah, yeah.
I'm
Well,
I'm
I
I'm better
dragged you
at what a couple of years ago.
oh, good, good. That's good. Well, and I'm still big. I'm at at the stage now where I've kind of accepted who I am, and I'm starting to feel good about where I'm going. But I'm it's like I've just left the front door. You know, I'm like Bilbo, and I haven't even hardly left the left the Shire yet, and I've got a whole journey yet in front of me. So. But yeah, so no, that's good. Fine. So boy, well, I'm sorry everyone. I kind of pulled us off track there, but it's not that often that I get to speak with pastors, and they have so much knowledge. I love it. One of my good friends, Max, is a pastor, and he always tells me that he's not really a Christian. He's an apprentice of Christ. And I'm like, okay, well, I like that. And he's like the sweetest guy ever. After I came out to him and his wife, within like a week, they had a big um, uh, Pride ally flag out in front of their house, and
Oh,
it was so sweet. I was like, man, I love that. I really do. So, well, guys, I think that was a pretty good talk here today with Pastor June Joplin. June, was there anything else you wanted to talk about?
no, I mean that's been great. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate you coming on, and everybody, I really appreciate you tuning in or listening, however you're consuming this show. Thanks once again to Rebecca Jonesy, who sponsors the show. She's the author of the Mabs Doll series. To everyone out there, please stay safe and stay strong. Bye.